everybody for coming to this press conference today. It's May 19th. It's the 59th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. 59 years ago, Martin Luther King was sitting in a Birmingham jail, arbitrarily detained for standing up for the rights of African Americans in the United States. And when he wrote Letter from a Birmingham Jail, it was a message for the good people of America, for the liberals of America, for those who said nice words but did not follow up those nice words with just actions. And we are here today on another issue of arbitrary detention. The arbitrary detention of 44 Canadian citizens, including Jack Letts, who this month marks 5 years of detention without charge under conditions that the United Nations describes as akin to torture. The federal government has known for 5 years that Jack Letts was tortured. They have known for 5 years about the brutal conditions that he and 7 other men and 13 women and 23 Canadian children, most of whom are under the age of 7, have endured for years in camps known as Guantanamo on the Euphrates. Later this year, the federal government is forcing these Canadian citizens' families to go to federal court to try and seek an order to repatriate them. It is shameful that the Canadian government, which prides itself as leading a coalition of over 50 nations in declaring itself against arbitrary detention, is complicit in the arbitrary detention of its own 44 Muslim Canadian citizens and refuses to bring them home. Our first speaker today is someone who's going to speak to the Islamophobia that is behind much of Canadian policy of refusing to repatriate these Canadian citizens. Nadia Abuzara, who is the co-chair of the Department of Women's Studies at Ottawa U and Carleton University. Nadia?
Are you ready to? Okay, I'll hold this.
It's an honor to be standing beside Sally Letts, the mother of Jack Letts, a Canadian who is arbitrarily detained at the moment in northeast of Syria. This Canadian should come home. I speak not only as a joint chair in women's studies at the University of Ottawa and Carleton University, but also as a mother, as a woman, as a fellow Canadian who would really like to see this young man come home. It's very important that we understand that no one should be subject to a violation of their rights. This is someone arbitrarily detained, meaning someone not even charged, let alone convicted of a crime. Someone who has not committed a crime. Someone who may have made an error in judgment, but that is not a crime. And he must be brought home immediately. And this is what we as all Canadians would want. Wouldn't we all want our children to be able to come home? I was asked to speak about Islamophobia. I think it's really dangerous when we start demonizing people for things that they have not done, for identities that have been generalized and made into something frightening. I think it's really important to remember that this is a young man who went to save people, who went as a humanitarian, who went to help, things that we can all relate to. Caught up in something larger, demonized, frightened, subject to conditions as we speak akin to torture, recognized as such by the international community, by the United Nations Special Rapporteur for precisely this kind of a situation. The United Nations is calling on Canada to repatriate Jack Letts. In fact, the prison guards, the people imprisoning Jack Letts, are calling on Canada to repatriate Jack Letts. So it is absolutely imperative that he be home not next week, but tomorrow. It is very frightening to think that his life is in danger. I will not go into the details of why his life is in danger, because I'm standing beside his mother. But you can imagine the mental health of a man who has been tortured for 5 years, kept in a cell, his height and half his width, a width that is half his height. These are very dangerous conditions, and no person, especially no young person at this very tender age, should be kept in such conditions. It is highly dangerous. In addition, he has a medical condition that endangers his health and may be fatal at any moment. These are precious times, and we must bring him back. And it is very important that we remember our common humanity, that we not demonize for any reason, for reason of faith, for reason of actions, but instead we recognize the common humanity, and we bring him home safely to a warm and welcoming environment, and above all to his mother. It's an honor to meet him.
Thank you, Nadia. And when Nadia is calling for repatriation today, she is not a lone voice. Human Rights Watch, the United Nations, Save the Children, the International Committee for the Red Cross, dozens of organizations have called for repatriation, and yet the Canadian government, which prides itself on multilateralism, on cooperation, on working with other bodies, refuses to act. We ask today of the Canadian government, how is it that a country like Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan or Bosnia is able to bring back their citizens with far fewer resources on the ground than the Canadian government has, and yet Canada says we simply cannot do this. We reject that so-called rationale, and I think our next speaker can speak exactly to what it's like when the Canadian government not only refuses to help your loved one, but is complicit in their ongoing arbitrary detention. Please welcome Dr. Monia Mazi.
Yeah. Okay. She's next.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Sally, for your courage to be here and remind us that our rights are very, very fragile. Today I'm standing here in the stairs of the Prime Minister's office with a group of Canadian citizens who are worried about the rights of other Canadian citizens. We are worried to see the rights of Jack Letts and 43 Canadians being disregarded, ignored, and abandoned. Since 2017, there are 44 Canadian citizens who are held in northern Syria by the Kurdish forces. They are held in conditions similar to torture. It is estimated that there are 24 Canadian children, most aged 7 and under, unlawfully detained in these camps and in these prisons. This is what Human Rights Watch said in their report. Canada has an obligation under international law to take necessary and reasonable steps to assist nationals abroad facing serious abuses, including risks to life, torture, and inhuman and degrading treatment. International law also grants everyone the right to return to their country of nationality without their government throwing up direct or indirect barriers. Why is the government of Canada doing nothing to bring back its own citizens home? Worse, why is Canada putting obstacles for families of Canadians who are trying to bring their loved ones back home? Why is Madame Mélanie Joly, Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister, doing nothing? Why doesn't she stand up for the right of Canadian children? Where is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who once declared, "A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. Why doesn't he stand up to bring Jack Letts and 43 other Canadians detained in northern Syria?" 20 years ago, my husband, Meher was also detained in Syria. He was never charged with any crimes, and still the Canadian government did not help him to come back. And similarly, they put all the obstacles to stop his repatriation. If it was not for the will, determination, activism of people like the one who are standing here today, my husband would have died in his Syrian prison. In the last 20 years, Canadian Muslims have been surveilled, spied upon, harassed in their workplace, on campuses, put under house arrest, had to wear electronic bracelets in their ankles to watch their movement, rendered to torture, kept for more than 10 years in Guantanamo, sent to prison to disappear. Canadian legislation was brought to criminalize Canadian Muslims. Very few courageous politicians and engaged citizens stood up against this systemic Islamophobia. Today we have 44 Muslim Canadians detained in northern Syria. They were never charged with any crimes. Their Canadian families want them back home, but the Canadian government is stopping them. How come that an American former diplomat, Peter Galbraith, is able to do more than the whole Canadian government, and still the Canadian government refused to cooperate with him? Today, as a Canadian Muslim woman who went through Islamophobia and still suffer from what the Canadian government did to my husband, to my children, and to myself, I am asking the Prime Minister Trudeau to walk the talk and fulfill his promise of fighting hate and Islamophobia. First, bring Jack Letts home to his mother Sally Lane and to his family. Second, bring all the 43 Canadians detained abroad, including the children who cannot go to school, learn, and live in healthy and safe environments. Third, listen to what organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International had mentioned in their reports about the urgent need to provide consular services and repatriation assistance to these Canadians detained abroad. Fourth, listen to Fionnuala Olin, the UN Special Rapporteur for the protection and promotion of the human rights and the countering terrorism, who put Canada on a list of shame, because it won't take active steps to repatriate its foreign nationals trapped in Kurdish-controlled camps in northern Syria. As a country, we have no credibility when, on one hand, we champion the rights of Uyghurs detained in Chinese concentration camps, but on the other hand, we leave other Canadians detained by Kurdish forces. Prime Minister Trudeau is probably scared of losing any political capital in returning home Muslim Canadians, but guess what? This is not true leadership. Leadership is not a popularity contest. It is about applying the laws and stopping the arbitrary detention and the abuse of the human rights of all Canadians, whoever they are, whatever their religion is. Free Jack Letts, free all the 44 Canadians detained in northern Syria.
Thank you, Monia. We have been gathering on these steps for 2 decades. We are into 2 generations of Canadians trying to bring home their loved ones. And here we still stand, despite the findings of the federal court, the Supreme Court of Canada, of judicial inquiries, of special investigative reports. Why will this government not stop harassing, terrorizing Canadian Muslims? Our next speaker has been waging a battle for 8 of those 20 years to bring her son Jack home. Please welcome Sally Lane.
Thank you everybody for coming today. It's been a very long, hard struggle for me and my family, for the families of all the other Canadians who are detained in Syria. We are part of an international family group from 60 different countries who are all involved in trying to bring our loved ones home. We've all faced the same obstacles from our governments who have given us one excuse after another as to why there's nothing that they can do. And I thought I would start with a quote from Vigil from the Red Cross, who visited our whole camp last week. And he said that the conditions there are cruel, inhumane, and unsustainable. And what the international community is tolerating in this camp will haunt us. And that quote to me sums up everything about this appalling situation in northeast Syria, where the shame, where people are kept with the arbitrarily detained condition, no freedom of movement, no access to adequate food or water or medical care or contact with their families. And this has been going on for upwards of 3 years. So for most people, it has been 3 years. For my son Jack, who has been trying to escape from Syria for 7 years now, and it has been 5 years incommunicado, meaning that we haven't spoken to Jack since 2017. Well, those were voice messages, so not even spoken. And the only contact that we have with him is via Red Cross letters that are heavily sensitive, because there no mention of conditions is allowed. The only way that we know anything about that conditions is from the first week when he was. Can you hear me? Okay. Jack had a flute conversation with Global Affairs Canada in January 2019. I say flute because the Canadian government didn't intend for it to happen. A journalist managed to force this conversation between Jack and a consular official, because during this whole time, the Canadian government has said there's nothing they can do, there's no consular assistance. They closed their embassy in 2012. Jack said that he was held in a cell with 35 other people, but there were only beds for 8, and so everybody else slept on the floor. He only felt safe when one of the guards was on duty, and that he was put in solitary confinement for 35 days as punishment for when me and my husband went to the press to talk about his condition. And so this is why family members have not spoken out, because they know that there will be repercussions on their loved ones. And the women in the camp are beaten if they're found in possession of mobile phones, and they're locked in toilets as a way of punishment. And so what we've been doing is trying to get some sort of action through Global Affairs Canada. What the government has been saying is that it's too difficult, too dangerous, or too complex a situation. Even though other countries have perfectly managed to bring their people home. In fact, in a league table, of repatriation, Canada is at the bottom. Even Britain, which has had the hardest line in refusing to repatriate people, has repatriated more people than Canada. Now, what is the reason for this? The international group have already, many of them have already started their court cases against the government. We're only starting ours now. Our case is supposed to go to court. Well, we thought next month, it might be delayed. And so we compare notes with these people from Sweden, from Finland, from Australia, from Morocco, Tunisia. How are they faring in their own fight against their government? They're all at various different stages. So, as Nafisa Mohammed, who wonderful former senator in the Trinidadian government, and now attorney, she was in the attorney's office, Attorney General office, said this is not rocket science. These people are suffering, they're displaced, and they need to be, they need protection. They don't need persecution or prosecution. And even the family members, it's highly ironic to me that family members themselves have been saying, if you think our relatives have done something wrong, then put them on trial. Just don't leave them in this legal black hole, this limbo, with no hope, complete despair, no idea of how long they're going to be there. Is it going to be another 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? The Guantanamo men who were rounded up on the battlefield, or not in the battlefield, just in the region, just like these people who will be rounded up by the Kurdish forces, 60,000 of them have been called terrorists. 60,000 people, 40,000 of whom are children. This is the Western narrative, that these people are terrorists. And logic alone would take that this is just a nonsense. And how is it that everyone has bought into this narrative that it's part of the so-called global war on terror that only targets Muslim countries, as we can see from the Ukraine. So the Ukraine now, where 20,000 fighters have gone over to fight against the Russians, just as many people in Syria were fighting against the Russian regime allied with the Syrian regime. They are now, the international legal community is scrambling to redefine these 20,000 fighters who have gone over, calling them volunteers or mercenaries. And they're now saying there's a distinction between foreign terrorist fighters and foreign fighters. Well, that was never a fighter, even though he has been placed in a prison with people who are suspected of being fighters. Also in that prison are 9-year-old boys, people who were rounded up by the SDF forces for refusing to join the draft. And this was only discovered in the Hassel prison massacre in January of this year, that there were 700 boys in the prison. No one even knew they were there. And 100 of them are still missing because when ISIS members stormed the prison, and then there was a counter-attack by the guards and also by the US military. US military bombed their own prisons in an attempt to increase security, supposedly, at the camp. And that's when I decided I have to speak publicly, because this is going to be my son that's next. This is going to be, my son is going to be the next president. Not only could he die from the conditions in the prison, he could be shot by the guards, or he could be killed by the US-led coalition forces who are supposed to be, who are taking charge of these people that they have no idea what they are going to do with them, apart from who knows what the plan is. So now we're calling on the Canadian government to take responsibility for our relatives and to stop this atrocious abuse of human rights. And that we want our relatives back before they're brought back in body bags. And Trudeau needs to listen to us. He's refused to meet with me. His ministers, all they do is party on to global affairs. He gives us the same paragraph of nonsense that they've been giving us for the past 7 years. Well, we've had enough, and we need our relatives to come home.
Thank you, Sally. Sally, can I just ask you, yesterday you received a letter from the Prime Minister's office saying he doesn't have time to meet with you. He's very busy. And we know that yesterday he was making time for Prince Charles and Camilla and the RCMP musical ride. How does that make you feel that the Prime Minister or his staff don't even have 10 minutes to come out here and talk about how to repatriate your son?
Yeah, it's a shocking situation. Also, the fact that Trudeau went to Ukraine to show solidarity with the Ukrainian people, whereas he can't spend 10 minutes to talk about the life-threatening situation of Canadian citizens. I think it's very interesting that during the coronavirus, the height of it in 2020, that 40,000 Canadians were repatriated from around the world, from 100 countries around the world. They didn't have to prove that they were deserving of assistance. They were brought back to Canada within a matter of weeks. And that's the other aspect of this issue as well, that it begs the question as to whether any other group of Canadians this treatment would be tolerated. Islamophobia it's a word that gets bandied about a lot, but can there be any other clearer example of an extreme form of Islamophobia where you have to prove that you are deserving of assistance? And everybody knows that if these children were Christian, they would have been home 3 years ago. And these things need to be called out, because Jack was a convert to Islam. Many of the other people in the camps were converts. They went out because they wanted to help against the oppressor, against Assad, who is being inexplicably rehabilitated by the rest of the Western world. And we need an end to this hypocrisy, and we need Trudeau to listen to us.
One more question, and I know the media have some questions for you as well, Sally. A lot of people who are walking by, they're giving thumbs up, but some people might be thinking, Jack Letts, I've heard that name in the media. It doesn't leave a good taste in my mouth. I understand that there are two Jack Letts. Can you explain the difference between the one that's a media creation and the real Jack Letts?
Yeah, the Jack Letts that is in the media is a fabrication that has been conjured up by a tabloid journalist in Britain, and who lied about the fact of a telephone call between myself and Jack. This journalist said that Jack had told me that he had joined ISIS. Well, who would know about this telephone call? Me and Jack, or a journalist? Jack has said that he is in ISIS territory right from the very beginning, where he has always denied that he was a member of ISIS. In fact, he opposed ISIS publicly when he was in their territory, and this is known by his Kurdish detainers. His Kurdish detainers said they had their own spies in the territory, and they knew that he was one of the good guys. And there's documented evidence, court evidence. He was taken to court by ISIS themselves for having an ideology that was incompatible with IS. Of course, none of this information gets to the media, because the original lie that has been expanded and has gone around the world, we've been when they were doing their investigation, that they had found nothing to suggest that he had done anything wrong. Well, these are the issues that never make it into the public domain. In our court case, where any money is sent to Syria is considered to be money for terrorism because it might fall into the wrong hands. This is why we were convicted on one charge, because the money might fall into the wrong hands. Didn't even get to Jack. But this is the wording of terrorism legislation because of the collective insanity that has hit the world at present. So we want a chance to say who Jack really is, and we're hoping that we're going to get a chance in the court case that is planned in the coming months.
Thank you, Sally. And it is worth pointing out that when Sally and her husband